part 1 we established that reality is continuous, and that as a result that reality is indeterministic. Now I'd like to consider a few examples along with a few ramifications of this result. Let's begin with the examples. I invite you to pause the video and visually locate the edge of the computer screen that you are now using. The location of the edge is not given by a measurement of infinite precision, but by probability distribution. You visually locate the edge approximately as given by a probability distribution. More generally, the location of any stationary object is given by a probability distribution, with the uncertainty mainly occurring along the edges of the object. As the lighting is dim, the uncertainty increases in our visually locating the object. In the figure, I've represented the uncertainty in location by showing a fuzzy edge, which widens in dim light. But a more accurate representation would show the dark outline of the table shading away with distance as portrayed by the probability distributions represented in the next slide. The distribution for viewing the table leg in bright light is narrower because in bright light there is less uncertainty about where the leg is located. In complementing this, the distribution for viewing the table leg in dim light is wider because in dim light there is more uncertainty about where the leg is located. We have established that since reality is continuous, our knowledge of the location of any object in space is necessarily probabilistic. This conclusion applies to the location of any object in time as well, and it applies to any feature of an object, such as its color or any sound that it makes. Now, you may challenge me by saying that we touch things, and we see things, and we hear things, real things. We don't touch, see, and hear probability distributions. We don't sort of feel the roughness of an orange, or sort of see a red rose, or sort of hear Dvorak's New World Symphony. We really, concretely, vividly experience these things, and they may stir our emotions deeply. Reality isn't ephemeral, but real. Let's think about this challenge. It is true that we can feel an orange, we can see a rose, and we can hear Dvorak's symphony. But let's not stop there. Let's explain what the result of our feeling and seeing and hearing is. Once we do this, we will realize that our experience is equivalent to a probability distribution after all, since we can't precisely specify values. The texture of an orange is rough, but we can't precisely explain how rough. A rose is red, but we can't precisely indicate how red. Nor can we precisely characterize what we hear in listening to the New World Symphony. This implies that our experience isn't precise. This conclusion is illustrated by a hypothetical experiment. Suppose that after feeling an orange, we are given a range of texture choices, and we're asked to rate each texture as to our confidence that the texture is that of the orange that we originally felt. We know that if the choices shade gradually in the region of the orange texture, the result will not be a point, but a probability distribution. A similar conclusion applies to the redness of a rose and to the variations in playing the New World Symphony. Put simply, our experience with any continuum of values is equivalent to experience of probability distribution, not to experiencing exact values. So in fact, we are limited to sort of feeling the roughness of an orange, and sort of seeing a red rose, and sort of hearing Dvorak's New World Symphony. That's all that we can do. And the reason is that reality is continuous. These examples illustrate that our knowledge of any state of reality is necessarily probabilistic in all of its features, because reality is continuous. By virtue of the knowability principle, this implies that any state of reality is indeterministic in all of its features. Now let's consider a few ramifications of indeterminism. Let's briefly consider the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, the Zeno paradoxes, and the indeterministic nature of ethical behavior. If you're familiar with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, you'll recall that the principle says that our knowledge of the simultaneous location and movement of a subatomic particle is of logical necessity limited. This result actually applies to an object of any size, but it is of practical importance only for very small objects such as subatomic particles. By comparison, the proof that I have presented that reality is indeterministic is straightforward, not requiring technical knowledge of physics. Furthermore, by virtue of the knowability principle, my proof is complete, establishing that indeterminism lies not just in our knowledge of reality, but in reality itself. That is, the proof that I have presented goes beyond the Heisenberg uncertainty principle to prove that reality is indeterministic, and more precisely, that any state of reality is indeterministic in all of its features. If you're familiar with the Zeno paradoxes, you'll recall that Zeno uses a number of scenarios to prove that motion is illusory because it is irrational. To take a familiar example, if a tortoise has a head start on Achilles, Achilles will never catch the tortoise because Achilles must first move to the halfway point between himself and the tortoise. But in order to reach that point, Achilles must first move to the halfway point between himself and the first halfway point ad infinitum, implying that Achilles can't move. This is an astutely clever idea, don't you agree? In the figure, the mark for Achilles represents, say, the tip of his right sandal, while the mark for the tortoise represents the tip of its snout. I invite you to pause the video and solve the Zeno paradoxes in light of the developments of this video. But if you'd like a hint, keep playing the video. Here's the hint. Where exactly is Achilles? Now pause the video if you'd like to solve the problem. Zeno would be correct if the location of an object such as Achilles could be given with infinite precision. But we've proven that this is irrational, and that in fact the location of an object is given by a probability distribution. Thus the location of Achilles is given by a probability distribution, the location of the tortoise is given by a probability distribution, and the movement of Achilles is given by movement of the probability distribution that represents its location. In the video on heaven and hell, I explained that the idea of dichotomous afterlife is irrational due to boundary breakdown on any ethical continuum and on the accountability continuum. I explained that due to boundary breakdown, God could not devise a rational criterion or a set of rational criteria that could be used to categorize each person as to whether or not they should be sent to heaven or to hell. I also mentioned that the notion of dichotomous afterlife requires not only categorizing everyone as to where they should be sent, but it also requires categorizing every thought, every feeling, and every act as to whether it is good or evil. And this would be impossible due to boundary breakdown. In light of the indeterminism of reality, we can now see that there is yet another reason that the idea of dichotomous afterlife is irrational, even if boundary breakdown were not an issue. Under the model of dichotomous afterlife, God must categorize every thought, every feeling, and every act as to whether it is good or evil. And this requires discretely defining what every thought, feeling, and act consists of, so that it can be categorized. But due to the indeterminate nature of reality, this is logically impossible to do. You can't discretely define thoughts, feelings, and acts. Due to the indeterminate nature of reality, the content of a thought, a feeling, or an act can be characterized only in terms of a probability distribution. Thus, just as the location of an object or the color of an object can be categorized only in terms of a probability distribution, so what a person thought at some time can be categorized only in terms of a probability distribution. And what a person felt at some time can be categorized only in terms of a probability distribution. And what a person did at some time can be categorized only in terms of a probability distribution. This is not normally a problem for us in everyday life, but it would be a problem if every thought, feeling, and act had to be categorized as to whether it is good or evil, meriting heaven on the one hand or hell on the other. We can see that the indeterminism of reality presents yet another unsolvable problem for the dichotomous afterlife model, providing yet another reason that the idea of dichotomous afterlife is irrational and hence is false.